Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Taylor, you are obviously a student of history, and I do believe you don't study history, you are doomed to repeat it. Let me read a quote. We have tried spending money. We are spending more than we have ever spent before, and it does not work. And I have just one interest. And now, if I am wrong, somebody else can have my job. I want to see this country prosper. I want to see people get a job. I want to see people get enough to eat. We have never made good on our promises. And I say, after 8 years of this administration, we have just as much unemployment as when we started and an enormous debt to boot. That's Henry Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of Treasury under Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, we haven't had 8 years of this administration, but as the Chairman spoke about, and being a small businessman myself, we keep talking about the uncertainty is what's keeping people on the sideline. I would say it's just the opposite. It is the certainty that under this administration's policy, we have no way in heck to dig ourselves out of this debt. And I am a firm believer that you have to kill more than you eat or you can't stay. I'm trying to understand how in the world, with these policies that we're enacting, with no remedial, only punitive actions against people and small business people, how in the world are we encouraging these people to hire people? Mr. Schiff, I feel your pain. Now, when we talk about China and what China is doing, well, China is not borrowing 42 cents in every dollar it spends. And it's not as clear and transparent a society as we would like it to be. So all these things are important. All these things are fun to talk about. The reality of this is the trajectory that we are on right now is totally unsustainable. Standard & Poor's was not wrong. If you want to see what's wrong, go back to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. When you tell banks that you have to lend money to people who no way in heck can pay it back, but you have to do it anyways. When I bought my first house, the first question I was asked by the lender is, how much money do you have to put down? And when I said $10,000, I was told you can buy a $30,000 house. Now flip it now. How much do you have to put down? Nothing. Then buy anything you want. We'll underwrite it. Doctor, we've talked about stimulus in the past. I know President Bush, I had friends that just couldn't wait to get that check from President Bush. In your opinion, what do people do with this money that they get back? Do they put it back in the economy, or what do they do with it?
They largely saved it. They largely put it in kept it in their pockets. And we've seen this time and time again. That's why it's so frustrating to hear this proposal coming out. I said, you want a history? We tried this in 1975, President Ford. And soon after it was done, his own Council of Economic Advisors looked at it and said it didn't work. Don't do this again. President Carter came in, 1977. Same thing. After that was done, his economic advisors said it didn't work. Then fortunately we had a couple decades where we didn't do these things. 2001 we had one. Look at that. I looked at it myself. It didn't work. 2008. And now 2009 is gigantic. And we're proposing it again. Why don't we learn these temporary interventions don't work, and I think they're counterproductive for many of the reasons you're saying.
Yeah, and I agree. And Mr. Schiff, I've also tried to borrow money. And I will tell you right now, the problem with lenders is they are scared to death because there's legislation passed with no rules. And banks, and I'm talking about the smaller banks, and I've come to believe that if you're too big to fail, you're also too small to survive. When collateral used to be what we worked on, but there's uncertainty as to what your collateral is going to be worth. When covenants change quarterly, it's very difficult to run a business. And what I'm saying, and I do believe, and I think Ms. Furgot-Roth, when you don't have policies that transcend the next administration, but don't go to 5- and 10-year plans, when you see a shift because of an election, that doesn't add any certainty to the way the economy is going to be stabilized. So in your opinion, and I know you do the same thing, I have to borrow a lot of money for my business to work, but when you can't borrow it, or when the regulations become too overburdened, that it makes it difficult for lenders to give it to you, it's bothersome to me. So I think it's very important that people understand this isn't easy, what we're doing. It's very difficult, and government's made it harder for us. You have to hit your mic, sir.
It takes two to tango. I mean, you can only borrow if somebody is saving. There has to be a lender on the other side of that transaction. There has to be something in it for the lender. You have to have higher interest rates. The problem is the banks are just getting money from the Federal Reserve and turning around and buying treasuries with it. That's not going to grow the economy. That's going to grow the government. But meanwhile, these monetary policies are stifling the savings that we need to grow the economy. And, Mr. Cummings pointed about he can, when people get a stimulus job, he can see those jobs. Yeah, you can always see the jobs that government creates. What you don't see are the jobs that they destroyed to create those jobs. All the government can do is rearrange the resources. It doesn't create any wealth. But the problem is the jobs or the wealth that gets destroyed is more productive than whatever the government replaces it with. And so, on balance, the country is poorer as a result of that. And it doesn't, the fact that if we send out a stimulus check, it's not going to stimulate the economy. If an American goes and buys some more products that were made in China, how does that help our economy? It runs up the trade deficit, and now we had to go deeper into debt to spend that stimulus check. All of that is counterproductive. And we're going to continue to repeat this mistakes. We're going to keep on throwing gasoline on this fire until we incinerate the entire country.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Now I yield to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Burkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Many of us came to Congress